Hi. So yesterday, folks, we talked a lot about, if you remember, the German guy introduced the concept of the World War I, and talked about a whole bunch of things like ideas, uniting German-speaking people, arms races, alliances, self-determination, crises. Those are the kinds of things that we said led the European nations to World War I and eventually drove the United States into World War I. Today, we're going to take a more in-depth look at what the United States is doing here at home. How are we preparing and getting ready to go to war? Now, there are a couple different reasons why we're able to go to war as a country, and we're able to go to war in part because we can pay for it. We have the strongest economy in the world, don't forget, right? We have the largest gross national product, and that allows us, as it says right here in the upper right, boop, 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 for us to be able to actually pay for this. Our economic strength is such that our country is going to be able to actually bear the cost, the actual physical, or I should say economical cost of this war. And there's a couple different ways our country is going to do that. A couple different ways that our country is going to be able to pay for this war. One of them is going to be called the War Industries Board, because think about all the stuff that a war takes to actually make happen. If you're going to actually produce the tanks, the guns, the bullets, everything else that you need to produce a war, somebody's got to do all of that. And someone's got to make sure that it happens in a reasonable way, in a fast way. So the War Industries Board is going to be the group that does that. And government in Washington, D.C. says, all right, what are the key resources around the world that we need to be, or around the world that we need to gather, bring to our country, and make into war supplies? So the War Industries Board gathers all of these resources. It says what's out there, oil, coal, aluminum, steel, whatever. It brings it to our country and says, okay, who's going to get it? This factory gets this factory gets that factory gets that. This allows the government to set the price for the good that it's buying. Because let's face it, if the government doesn't set the price, instead of charging what it's worth, maybe with a little profit, those companies are going to charge ridiculous amounts of money and really hurt our country's economy in an attempt to make a profit off of this war. So the War Industries Board's design is to make sure that we're supporting our troops, that we're producing an army capable of winning, but that we're not going to bankrupt ourselves trying to pay for this war that's being fought over in Europe. The other thing that we're going to do here, and you can see them on this slide, is our government's going to sell something called a Liberty Bond. And the way it works is pretty simple. Our government says, hey, we need your money. So you, being a very patriotic American, loan the government right now $1. Good job, you. And as you loan the government that $1, it's going to spend it on whatever it needs to spend it on for the war. And then what's going to happen is time is going to pass, I don't know, let's say 20 years, right? 20 years pass, and then you get from the government $2 back. It's an investment. You give money now, time passes, you get more money later. That more money, by the way, that you're getting, that's called interest. It's called interest. So you make a profit off this war, but it also helps our country pay for this war, which is one of the reasons why we're able to go to war, because we can afford it as a country. We can actually afford the fight itself. The other big reason why we're able to go to war is that we're actually able to convert this money, convert this economy that we have into the actual labor that we need to produce the stuff and an economy capable of making this stuff. You can have all the money in the world, but if you can't make anything, it doesn't do you any good, right? You need the stuff. We have the labor force capable of making this material, and we've got the economy capable of producing large amounts of it. So you can see down here, right beneath me, a couple of different ways our government's going to use its influence to keep our labor force happy. One of them is called the National War Labor Board, and the idea there is pretty simple. If you've got a company that's out here, a company that is, I don't care what it's making, it can be making whatever it wants to make, right? You've got a company, it's over here and it's making whatever. But unfortunately, it really, really, really treats its workers bad. Oh, sad face. Me. Then those workers aren't going to work so hard. No, they're not. And they're not going to make a lot of stuff for the war. So the National War Labor Board comes along and says, hey, give those workers better pay. Give those workers better conditions, man. What are you doing? We need those materials for the war. It's going to use its influence to help turn that frown upside down to create happy workers. Happy workers make more. We're also going to see more and more women pulled into these factories as well. So we'll see more and more women that are out there joining the workforce to make these goods, something a lot of other countries won't do. We're also going to see that America, for the first time, really opens its companies up to large numbers of African American employees. This is a big deal because prior to this, remember, most African Americans are stuck sharecropping in the South. Now, with World War I, we're going to have something called the beginnings of the Great Migration. And that's a really important concept. And the Great Migration lasts from about 1916 to about 1930, and then there's a second Great Migration later. But what happens here are large numbers of African Americans fleeing sharecropping and heading north to these industrial cities. And they're heading north to all of these cities to work in these wartime factories. This is going to allow African Americans a better chance at a way different kind of life, and it's going to help our factories produce more than before when it comes to actual World War I needed items. This gives us a really popular and really strong labor force because they're happy. National War Labor Board, we've got lots of replacement workers and women who replace the white males, and we have lots of African Americans who replace those white males moving north as well. I want to set that up because after World War I, all those white soldiers who left their jobs to go fight in Europe, they're going to come home. And they're going to find a lot of women and a lot of African Americans in their jobs. Now the women, most of them are going to return to their previous jobs. The question is, what are those African Americans going to want to do? And we'll talk about that shortly. So we've got a country that can pay for the war, right? It can actually pay for it. We can afford to go to war. We can pay for it. We have a labor force capable of producing all the things we need for war. That's two things, right? That's two things. A third thing that we have is going to be a willing public, and that's going to be really, really important later on in the war when some of these countries don't have willing publics, but America does. And it's going to show its support for a willing public by passing some laws that are actually kind of controversial. They're called the Espionage Act and the Sedition Act. And the goal here is to actually limit criticism of the war. We don't want people to actually verbally criticize the war. That's going to hurt the morale of our labor force. It's going to hurt the morale of our troops. Could cause us some problems down the line. At the same time, we want to make sure no one's spying either. And you can see some of these World War I posters and cartoons talk all about that. Don't talk. The web is spun for you with invisible threads. Keep out of it. Help to destroy it. Stop. Think. Ask yourself if what you were about to say might help the enemy. Spies are listening. And on the flip side, you actually have some Americans, not many, who say, I'm not so sure this is a bright idea, right? We have potentially some people that might be dangerous, a little fly, too drastic. Smashing yourself in the head with the Sedition Act might be a little too drastic. Maybe it's too much of a restriction on free speech. So it is a controversial set of laws. We sacrifice free speech in order to try and raise morale. It does keep a willing public, however. It also has an unintended consequence in that Americans are really going to become fearful of different groups of people, including German Americans. who get targeted because our primary enemy is Germany. We're going to see beatings of German Americans. There's going to be prejudice against them. There's going to be a whole bunch of persecutions against them. It's going to be a bit of a mess. But it does lead to a willing public, something that is really important for people when fighting a war. What else do we need? Let's find out. The last thing we need, and I know it's going to sound a little bit obvious, is a strong military. You've got the economy to pay for a war. They can produce all of these goods because we have a strong labor force, a happy labor force. And we've got a willing public, a public that says, dude, let's go fight this war. Let's round up these Germans. Let's make it happen. Now we actually need the strong military. So you're going to see about 2 million men actually volunteer for this war. And that's a lot of people saying, yo, hey, you, sign me up. I want to go fight in that war. And we're going to draft another 1.8 million men. So we're talking almost 4 million people are going to be fighting this war. And a draft, by the way, is when you are randomly selected for military service, and you can see that right here in your notes. 400,000 African Americans are going to be drafted. Now, I just want you to stop and think about this, right? African Americans are the target of incredible prejudice in 1914. We still segregate, we still lynch, we still treat people brutally, we barely pay them. They're only now just moving north in the Great Migration to work in factories. Prior to that, they're sharecroppers in the South, terribly impoverished. And now we're drafting them to go fight for our country? What? On top of it, we say, oh, African-American guy, you get to serve in a racially segregated unit. That means a white guy is going to lead you because we don't think you're smart enough to lead yourself. To the credit of African-Americans, they serve with incredible distinction. In fact, some of their units, like the Harlem Hellfighters, are the most feared units in the American Army. Good for them, because honestly, if you told me that was the gig I was getting into, pay me less, treat me worse, never even going to go. Last big thing that I want to take a look at here is that we don't just limit this to people that volunteer or people that are drafted, not even if we treat them poorly like we do with African Americans. We also, for the first time ever, begin to really accept women into the armed forces. Officially, non-combat positions, mostly nursing, mostly clerical. But what's important here is that for the first time ever, the Navy actually enlists women. Women can officially join the Navy. That's a really big freaking deal for women's rights. But that smartness, bringing in women, drafting African Americans, even if we're not treating them fairly, is going to allow us to have a very strong military, one that's capable of changing and turning the tide in World War I in Europe. And so we'll finish there with that, and we'll talk more about the actual war tomorrow.